Oh, Marcellus, you sure have a lot of dignitas. Kiss me. Okay.
Hey, Dad. Hi, son. Just reading the newspaper. What can I do for you? Well, you know how you always say Rome is the greatest civilization in the world? It bloody well is. Well, I was just wondering, what makes us so great? How did we come to be?
Wow, my son. Boy, let me take you on a journey.
To this side of the room.
The story of Rome begins with these beautiful baby boys going to town on some she-wolf mommy milkers.
That's gross.
You're gross!
Sorry, son.
You're not gross. I love you. They're called Romulus and Remus, and when they grew up, in 753 BC, they founded Rome. But there was just one problem. They couldn't agree on which of them should be the king. But they worked it out peacefully, right? Oh, heavens no. Romulus caved Remus's skull in with a shovel. Here's a picture. Our first king committed fratricide? I know. Look at his face. When's the part where we become the greatest civilization, Dad? Well, you see, at first Rome was full of men. I'm talking like a real sausage party. You know what I mean? Yes, sir. So we invited some neighboring cities over for a big feast. And then we literally kidnapped all of their women. Here's a picture. Look at that one. She's like, this is messed up. You're messed up. Ugh. Sorry. I'll be a better father. I promise. So then, finally, after centuries of monarchy, those tyrannical kings started getting a little too big for their britches. So we overthrew the kings and established Rome as a republic. Is that when all the killing stopped? Oh, heavens no. That's when the killing surged, baby. We went wild and conquered the Latin League, the Samnites, the Etruscans. Woo! What a rush. Dad, Rome seems pretty barbaric. You're barbaric! Oh, I forgot to tell you about the time a prophet told Saturn his son would one day overthrow him. So Saturn literally ate his own son seconds after he was born. I don't want to see a picture. Here's a picture. Dad! Look at that! That's messed up, man. Are we really this uncivilized? Hey! If we were so uncivilized, would we use communal toilets where we all fart and poo together in one big stinky, steamy, dirty toilet room? Yeah, Dad. We would! Clean your butt with a sponge, Timulus! But all these guys just used it! What's wrong with your son, bro? I don't want to be Roman. This is so weird. You're weird! Sorry, you're not weird. I'm sure you're probably fine. The Roman Republic. A nation that, since its foundation, had been stabbing necks all the way down the Italian peninsula. But this isn't the famous Roman Empire that ruled the known world. Not yet anyway. This is a relatively juvenile Rome, still just a regional power. In 264 BC, the big daddy of the Western Mediterranean was Carthage. Let's rewind a bit. Carthage was founded in 814 BC, when some Phoenicians in Tyre had a mega surplus of goods and decided to export those goods across the Mediterranean. They became the dominant trading power in the region, and to support their growing trade network, the Phoenicians established a number of colonies, one of which was Carthage. Therefore, Carthage began its life as a Phoenician trade colony, and the Carthaginians were actually Phoenicians. Or, if you're a Latin-speaking Roman, they were Punic. Hence the name of the video. Over the centuries, Carthage gradually expanded and became the region's base of power. Just like Rome, Carthage was a semi-democratic republic with its own senate and judiciary. But there were also some pretty hefty differences between the two. While Rome was big into farming and stabbing people in the neck, the Carthaginians, on the other hand, just like their Phoenician forefathers, had built their power through trade and navigating the waves. They went here and there, selling ivory tusks, gold, and slaves. And as a result, they were rolling in it. Whenever they weren't busy swimming around in their copious hoards of money, in their spare time, they also possibly enjoyed sacrificing their children to Baal, the god of... Let me just check my notes. Yes. Plant fertility. Oh boy, these figs aren't looking too hot. Maybe if I throw my son into a burning pit of fire, they'll grow. Have you tried watering them, Dad? No, we'll try that second. As a result of all their trading, Carthage had emerged as one of the Mediterranean superpowers. But wait, they said. Rome? What the heck is that? Well, I know it's a pretty obscure little country that you've probably never heard of. But this spunky young nation was about to upset the entire region's balance of power. Initially, the two sides enjoyed relatively friendly relations and had even signed a couple treaties. But it was a relationship that was practically destined to turn sour. See, Rome had a thing where they liked to aggressively expand their boundaries, often viewing such expansion as a defensive act. Kinda like when you kill your neighbor, because you knew eventually they would have tried to kill you first. Meanwhile, Carthage was extremely protective of its wealthy trade network. So if you put a very strategically important island between them, well, 2 + 2 = war. Tensions rose, and the two sides began viewing each other with increasing disdain. The hard-working Romans looked across the water at the money-hungry Carthaginians and said, "Look at those dishonest crooks. Bet they've never done an honest day's work in their lives." And the Carthaginians looked back and said, "Look at those simple-minded brutes. Bet they've never sacrificed a baby in their lives." Yeah! While war between the two superpowers seemed inevitable, the event that finally triggered it was a little unexpected. The whole thing began with a few simple mad lads on a wild night out. These mad lads are called the Mamertines. They were Italian mercenaries employed by the tyrant of Syracuse here. But when he died, his successor said, "Sorry fellas, we don't need any big burly men with sharp sticks anymore. You can all go home." The Mamertines, as it turned out, didn't want to go home. So instead, they went to the nearby town of Messana and said, "Hey man, we are but poor little buff boys without a home. May we come in?" Aw, poor fellas. Sure thing. Just so long as you promise not to massacre all of us. We promise. The Mamertines then massacred all of them. Well, not all of them, just the men. And they stole their homes and families. Ha! This is my house now. This is my best dad ever mug now. And you guys are my new family. Son, wanna go play catch with your old papa? You're not my real dad! Ugh, teenagers. Am I right, dear? You're not my real husband! Ugh, I'm so trapped in this marriage. Then get out! No, Messana was now controlled by the Mamertines, and they began raiding up and down the Syracuse coastline. When the new ruler of Syracuse saw this, he wasn't happy. The Syracusans began fighting back, and in response, the Mamertines said, "Oh crap, they're fighting back? What do we do? Quick, we'll convince the Carthaginians to come and save us." Oh no! We're in trouble, and we need a big, strong empire to come and rub our bellies. Why are you saying it like that? If I was a big, strong empire, I think I'd like to be seduced. See? It's working! The Carthaginians had long dreamed of controlling all of Sicily. They had been fighting Syracuse and their Greek influence on the island for centuries. And now, here was a great opportunity to get one over on them. So Carthage promptly answered the Mamertines' cry for help and sent a force to garrison Messana. As it turned out, however, some within the ranks of the Mamertines weren't too happy with the occupying Carthaginians, and they sent out a second cry for help to Rome. When it reached the Roman Senate, they were a little more hesitant. Going to help the Mamertines ran the risk of triggering an all-out war with Carthage, and they had only just finished conquering the Italian peninsula, so they were kind of tired. Plus, the Mamertines were all the way across the water. They had never made a leap like that before. So you would assume that to avoid any conflict with Carthage, the exhausted Romans would probably sit this one out. But you would assume wrong. Rome just couldn't resist a good chance for war. Why? Well, there's something you gotta understand about Rome. See, as a republic, they were hell-bent on preventing any one man from ever gaining too much power. And so rather than having one leader, Rome had two, called consuls, who shared power. These consuls could also only serve for 1 year at a time before new consuls were elected. These measures to limit the powers of the consuls were noble, but had an interesting side effect. The consuls knew they had just 1 year to try and gain as much glory and prestige as possible, something that was very important in Roman society. And the best way of gaining glory and prestige? Military victory, of course. The Roman political system basically ended up encouraging these consuls to go out and be as aggressive as your Italian grandmother when you don't eat all the spaghetti. And so the glory-seeking consuls convinced the people to vote in favor of going to Messana. And in they went. Upon the arrival of the Romans, the Carthaginians in the city, amongst the confusion, were forced to leave. Now, in contrast to Roman aggression, the Carthaginian military had a slightly different philosophy. All right, kids, listen up. If you want to grow up to be Carthaginian military leaders, there's a few things you have to understand. If you fail to succeed on the battlefield, that's a crucifixion. Showing cowardice, that's a crucifixion. Hello, sir. What are you doing here? Aren't you meant to be in Messana? Yeah, but the Romans showed up. So you just left? Sure did. Oh, you better believe that's a crucifixion. The Roman consuls were awarded for victory, and therefore tended to be aggressive go-getters. By contrast, the Carthaginian generals were brutally punished for failure, and so they tended to be more cautious and restrained. This dynamic is helpful for understanding some of the crazy things that happened during the Punic Wars. So, the Romans have crossed over to Messana, and now there was some red on the island. Hit that panic button. This turn of events was unacceptable to both Carthage and Syracuse, so the traditional enemies teamed up to kick the Romans off their island. They surrounded the city and said, "Hey, you jerks! This isn't your island! Come out of there at once!" "Okay, we're coming!" See, Phil, you just gotta speak with authority. That's what being an alpha male's all about. Hey, man. Oh, you brought your weapons and armor? No, I didn't mean... Oh, crap. Out the Roman legions came to engage the Carthaginians in battle, and they sent them packing. With the Battle of Messana, whether intended or not, by going to help the Mamertines, the two sides had just slipped into an all-out war. With the initial Roman victory, towns across Sicily, including Syracuse, began switching allegiance, because being a winner is more fun. But the Carthaginians weren't about to just give up that easily. In 262 BC, they began building up their forces at Agrigentum. So the Romans, being aggressive go-getters, aggressively go-got them. The Romans immediately laid siege, hoping to starve out the Carthaginian garrison. However, because this was the first time Rome had been fighting outside the Italian peninsula, across the water, they struggled to supply their forces, and before long, the Romans were as starving as the Carthaginians they were besieging. They had to forage for food, leaving them open to ambush. And when Carthaginian reinforcements arrived, creating a double siege, things got really bad. Everybody starved each other for months until nobody could take it anymore, and they all finally came out for battle, which Rome won. Here's the report from the recent siege at Agrigentum, sir. We killed 30,000 while only suffering 7,000 losses? That's amazing! We're the best! Yes, sir. Whoops, those are the wrong way around. What? We lost 30,000? We're the worst! But we won, right? Yes, sir. But we also got our asses kicked. Yes, sir. So are we the best or the worst? Yes, sir. The Romans won at Agrigentum because they were aggressive go-getters, and they now began eyeing up the possibility of conquering the entire island. But they also suffered very heavy losses, and it was clear they couldn't sustain a campaign if they couldn't supply their troops. Here's the issue. Sicily was an island. Islands are surrounded by water. A strong navy would be vital for supplying troops and winning the war. Here was Carthage's navy, and here was Rome's. I think you can see the problem. Historians debate just how much naval experience Rome had at this point. Presumably, they must have had something to defend their shoreline. But whatever it was, it would have paled in comparison to the Carthaginian juggernaut. And so Rome had to figure out exactly what to do about all this water. Come on, men. We're not gonna let some pansy candy-ass water get in the way of our glorious victory against Carthage. Charge! Tell my kids I love them. We're gonna need a bigger boat. What's a boat? I don't know. If the Romans wanted to win this war and obtain Sicily, there was only one thing for them to do. I guess we're just gonna have to go ahead and build ourselves a war fleet, aren't we? From scratch? From scratch. But we don't even know how. Never mind how to fight with one. Don't worry, Hank. We're up to the challenge. Come on, guys. We're Romans. And Romans aren't afraid of anything. And so, the Romans worked long and hard trying to figure out how on earth you actually build the latest style of warship. In the end, they had a bit of luck on their side. A Carthaginian quinquireme ended up accidentally grounding on Italian soil. The Romans found it and copied the design. While the new fleet was being built, the Romans trained rowers on land. And would you believe it? The Romans put together a full fighting fleet of 120 warships in just 2 months. A staggering feat. Now, I know what you're thinking, but oversimplified. If the Romans can build a war fleet from scratch in 2 months, then why does it take you half a year to make a video? Well, my valued subscriber, I think you should shut up. What the heck? How on earth did the Romans learn how to build a war fleet? This shouldn't be happening. From what I hear, they copied the design from us, sir. Well, how on earth did they get the blueprint, Carl? I don't know, sir. But I'll tell you what. If you're worried about people stealing your data, no, and you want to protect yourself from outside threats, don't you dare. Then you, my friend, if you mention NordVPN, I'll scream. Should use NordVPN. The siege at Agrigentum, supply issues, and building a war fleet. So now the Romans have a navy, and it's time to put it to the test. But how does one wage ancient naval warfare? Easy. All of the ships had giant bronze rams on the front, so all you had to do was outmaneuver the enemy and give him the jimmies. Easy as pie. And so the aggressive Romans set out for some good old-fashioned jimmy giving. The consul, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio, set out for the town of Lipara, believing the garrison there wanted to join the Romans. As he entered the harbor, however, he found himself trapped by a Carthaginian fleet, and in the following skirmish, he was completely outmatched. The Romans may have had a brand new fleet, but when it came to engaging in actual combat, their inexperience showed. There was just something better about the Carthaginian ships. The Carthaginian rowers had nicer abs. The entire Carthaginian Empire had been built on expert seamanship. So, when it came to water, the Carthaginians were better, and the Romans were wetter. In their initial skirmish, the Romans were beaten so badly that the consul, Scipio, was given a nickname, Asina. And if you're wondering what that means, just drop the Ina. So what were the Romans to do? How could they possibly stand up to this Carthaginian superpower? Well, there's something you gotta understand about the Romans. Back when they found that Carthaginian ship and copied its design, that wasn't a one-off thing. Copying their enemies was as Roman as punishing murderers by sewing them into a leather pouch with a monkey, snake, and rooster, and then throwing them into a river, which is a thing they did. Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, copying their enemies. Many of the most famous Roman inventions were actually borrowed. Aqueducts, chariot racing, their gods. Even in warfare, the Romans would get pierced by a Sabine javelin, and they'd be like, wow. They'd get hacked to bits by an Iberian sword, and they'd be like, wow. And they'd copy the designs for themselves. However, they wouldn't just copy it. They would advance it, finding ways to adapt it as perfectly as possible. And in the case of naval warfare, the Romans realized if they wanted to beat the Carthaginians at their own game, they would have to adapt. The Romans excelled at combat on land, not on water. But what if, they said, we could somehow turn a sea battle into a land battle? Sounds crazy, right? Well, they made a couple of tweaks to their warship, and look, here they come again. They must love getting their asses kicked. Sir? What's that toll thing sticking out of their ships? They really are idiots. Look at that thing. That'll make them blow over. I mean, look at... Bob! Bob! Get your camera out. Take a picture of it. I mean, how stupid can you be? Let's just add a big wooden tower to our ship that'll weigh us down and blow us over in the wind. I mean, what does that thing even do? The Romans had built a big swinging spiked gangway called the Corvus. So when the Carthaginian ships approached to ram them, the Romans would just slam them. The Carthaginians tried going around. No problem. The Corvus could swivel. Try going behind. The Romans would huddle to the coastline. It was foolproof. Those big, sexy Carthaginian rowing muscles could flex all they want, but they were no match for the Roman mind. So ladies, you see, what really matters is what's on the inside. Please go out with me. And with that, the Romans, who had only just recently began dabbling in the art of naval combat, thanks to their ingenious corvus, had just managed to outclass the Mediterranean seafaring superpower. The Carthaginians were stunned, and the general in charge of the defeated Carthaginian fleet, well, you better believe that's a crucifixion. With their newfound control of the seas, the Romans could now more easily blockade coastal cities and supply their legions on land. Surely, the Romans were now free to unleash their aggression all over the island. Haha! Hey Carthaginians, what are you gonna do now that we're free to rampage across the island? We're gonna go inside these walls and close this gate. Oh, come on guys, stop messing around. Come out so we can kill you. No. Oh, come on. No. Oh, no. To counter the new Roman supremacy, the Carthaginians decided to engage in a defensive war of attrition, forcing the Romans to engage in siege after lengthy siege. The war in Sicily became a long, hard, back-and-forth slug. One by one, cities slowly fell as the Romans gained ground. Occasionally, the Carthaginians countered and even pushed them back, only for the Romans to rebound again. And whenever a city did finally fall, the Romans could delight in slaughtering the entire population and selling any survivors into slavery, which was pretty standard procedure at the time. In general, the campaign on land was progressing much slower than the Romans had hoped, and quite frankly, they were getting sick of it. So in 256 BC, they decided that something had to change. Hey everyone, my name's Marcus Attilius Regulus, and I'll be one of your consuls for this year. Look, as I'm sure you all know, Sicily's being a bit of a drag. Sure, I could go and spend my entire year as consul besieging one single city, but they'll never make a naked statue of me for that. So here's the new plan. I'm gonna skip Sicily entirely, take my army, and go right for the heart of Carthage itself. I'll slaughter the men, enslave all the women and children, and when I return, you'll all build 1,000 naked statues of me. Marcus, that women and children stuff, that seems pretty evil and barbaric. No, Jim, it's perfectly normal in the ancient world. Sometimes we even chop their pets in half. Okay, guys, looks like the Romans are coming straight for us this time. And what will they do when they get here? They'll kill us all. They'll massacre each and every last one of us. They may even chop our pets in half. That's barbaric! No, Rob, it's actually pretty normal for the time. We'd do the same to them. Who'll protect us? Funny you should ask, Mary. That's kind of why I called this meeting. Who will protect us? Protect our families, our homes, our children. You guys? Ha! Don't make me laugh. Why, you're just a bunch of stupid and weak farmers. Simple-minded buffoons. Cowards. Fools. Rob here thinks enslaving women and children is barbaric. You're a snowflake, Rob. Yes, you are. The fact is, if the Romans manage to land on African soil, we're all gonna die. A terrifying, hideous, unspeakably painful death. Is that the end of that speech? Yes. The Carthaginians had to stop the Romans from ever landing in Africa because they believed that would be the end. So as the Romans were building an invasion fleet, the size of which the world had never seen before, the Carthaginians were preparing an even bigger one to stop them. And in 256 BC, as the Roman invasion fleet made its way south, the stage was set for a humongous battle that saw 680 warships, around 300,000 men, fighting to decide the course of the war. To this day, the Battle of Cape Ignomus remains possibly the largest naval battle in human history, all the way back in ancient times. So the next time your granddad tells you about the time he sank a Japanese aircraft carrier, kick him in the nuts. The Romans had a lot riding on this battle. They weren't just sending their warships, but transports as well. full of supplies and horses for their invasion of Africa. They therefore formed a protective wedge-like formation to punch through the long, thin Carthaginian line. The Carthaginian generals, however, desperate to prevent the Romans from reaching Africa, had a plan of their own. As the Roman fleet approached, the Carthaginian center feigned a retreat, luring the Romans in so their outstretched flanks could envelop them and get around the Roman corvus. A clever plan. But with such a huge battle and so many ships crowded together, the Carthaginians struggled to maneuver as hoped. And in the chaos, 3 separate battles emerged across the huge battle space. With the number of ships limiting their ability to maneuver, the Carthaginians became sitting ducks, and all the Romans had to do was start swinging. The Roman center came out on top and were then able to turn around and rescue their pinned down flanks. The Battle of Cape Egnomus was a Roman victory. After the gigantic battle at Cape Egnomus, the Romans were now free to land on African soil. And so, they did. The Carthaginians chose to focus on defending the city of Carthage itself. So the Romans immediately took the city of Aspis and were then free to raid and plunder the countryside. They took over 20,000 slaves and a ton of booty. But then, some orders arrived from the Senate. Send home the booty.
Oh, but I want to stay.
No, Steve, not you. They mean the treasure. Well, we are not watching any more of this filth. So the other consul left with the booty, leaving Regulus and his forces on their own, and they began advancing towards Carthage. Along the way, according to the ancient writer Livy, they encountered a literal dragon. Now Livy was a Roman historian, so his account may be slightly exaggerated, but this, I believe. As the Romans continued to plunder, the Carthaginian people flooded into the city. Now, not only was it in a major panic, but it was so crowded, the people began to starve.
Don't panic, everyone!
Look, I know you're all starving, but I still have food. For me. So, you know, it's not all bad.
Whoa! You're wasting your tomatoes! And you idiots wonder why you're starving? Oh well, it's just more food for me! Hum, yum, 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 yum. Hum, yum, yum.
Things weren't looking good for Carthage. They had to do something to stop the Romans rampaging throughout their land. So they decided, finally, it was time to put an end to it. They headed out and set up on rough hilly terrain overlooking the Roman camp, and they prepared for battle. Now, while the Carthaginians were the traditional masters of the sea, on land, they weren't always the brightest. Case in point, setting up in this position overlooking the Roman camp was just about the stupidest thing they could have done. Why? Well, there's something you gotta understand about Carthage. The Carthaginian land forces actually suffered from a multitude of different issues. First of all, since the Carthaginians were rich, they could afford to pay a huge number of foreign mercenaries to fight for them. These mercenaries actually made up the vast majority of Carthage's forces, and therefore, Carthage's land armies were a melting pot of many different cultures. This, however, meant that if a battle wasn't going their way, there could be loyalty issues. Man, I ain't getting paid enough for this. You Balearic slingers better not be thinking of running away. What did he say? I don't know, man. I don't speak Phoenician. Let's get out of here. Clearly, there were also language issues. The military generals tended to be Carthaginian, but they made a lot of strange decisions. For example, one of the most feared assets of the Carthaginian army were the war elephants. To a Roman soldier who had never even seen an elephant before, this was like fist fighting, a literal monster. Yet the Carthaginians continually kept placing the elephants in the rear, where they were no use. In a similar fashion, the neighboring region of Numidia provided Carthage with the most skilled cavalrymen in the world. But the Carthaginians often chose to fight on rough, uneven terrain, where horses and elephants were less effective. And so, in this case, when the Carthaginians again chose the rough terrain near the Roman camp, the Romans easily sent them packing. Wow, Regulus, we're mere miles from Carthage. You sure are amazing. Yes, Steve, I know. Steve, what's the matter? We've almost won. I just wish I could be as great as you, Regulus. Steve,
You're amazing. I mean, look at this thing. It's unbelievable. I know, but I mean like at war stuff. I'm such a noob. My tanks always get blown up. I can't even fly an aircraft straight. Tanks? Aircraft? What are you talking about, Steve? I'm talking about free-to-play online multiplayer combat game, invading Africa, getting some booty, and sending the Carthaginians packing. Everything was looking up for Regulus. A Roman victory seemed like it was only a matter of time. But then, Regulus realized something. He had been consul for almost a year, and his term was coming to an end. He knew that if his successor took over and he finished the job, then he would get the naked statues, not Regulus. And there was no way Regulus was going to allow that. So he jumped the gun. You there, Carthaginian boy! I want you to deliver a message to your elders. I, Marcus Attilius Regulus, demand the total and unconditional surrender of Carthage. Unconditional surrender? Jeez, at least lay siege and starve us all to death first. Just deliver the message, you punk! He demands your total surrender. What? Jeez, at least lay siege and starve us all to death first. Hey, that's what I said. Well, boys, this Roman thinks we're out. But we're not out, are we, boys? No! We'll do what we always do in times like this. Hire somebody else to solve our problems for us. Darren, bring in the Spartan! Regulus's overly harsh demands had had the unintended effect of reinvigorating Carthaginian resolve. They brought in a mercenary from the famed land of Sparta named Xanthippus to help dig them out of this situation. And we all know what Spartans are like. Xanthippus showed up and immediately took charge. He had a look around and said, "You idiots! Put the elephants in front of the army so they can smash into the Romans. And stop fighting on rough, uneven terrain. Find a big flat field so your superior cavalry can do their job. And what's this I hear about you giving a speech telling everyone they're gonna die? Hey, I was just telling the people the truth. You're a politician. Lie to the people." And so Xanthippus led out the newly reformed Carthaginian army to meet Regulus in the Battle of the Bagridas River. The elephants, now in the front, smashed into the Roman lines, causing disarray. The cavalry, with total freedom of movement, outflanked the Roman infantry. Thanks to this impressive Spartan, the battle was a total Carthaginian victory. And Xanthippus, for his stunning victory, was forced to flee Carthage because the leadership got jealous. Regulus, the Roman consul, was captured during the battle. Legend has it, he was brought before the Carthaginian council, and they made a proposition. Well, Reggie, not looking so good anymore, is it? Looks like we beat you pretty bad, huh? Up yours, you Punic pansies! Now, Regulus, nobody likes a sore loser, do they? No. How about this? We're gonna send you back to Rome, and you convince the Roman Senate to surrender to us. If you fail, though, you gotta come back so we can torture you to death, okay? Okay. You promise? I promise. Hey guys. Whoa, Regulus! We thought you got captured. I did, but they sent me back to convince you to surrender. Well, should we? Surrender? No! Never surrender! Give 'em hell, boys. They're at the end of their rope. Anyway, I gotta go be tortured to death now. What? Yep, part of a deal I made. It's a long story. Oh, hey, wait! Regulus! No, it's cool, guys. I promised. Regulus! This is ancient times. We massacre entire populations. We chop pets in half. You can break a promise. No, Tim! You never break a promise. That's too far. And so, Regulus went back to Carthage and was tortured to death. And for keeping his promise, he was immortalized as the leading symbol of Roman virtue. Meanwhile, after their defeat in Africa, the remaining Roman survivors, still in Africa, were still in Africa, and they needed to be rescued. So the Romans sent their fleet to pick him up and bring him home. They successfully fended off a Carthaginian fleet, grabbed the survivors, and made their way to Sicily. A great success. But then, things took a turn for the worse. Sir, that cloud looks kind of angry. Fear not, coward. If we Romans can build a war fleet from scratch and defeat the Carthaginian Empire at their own game, why then even Mother Nature herself will crumble before us. I laugh in the face of Mother Nature. Ha ha! See? Come on, guys. Laugh at Mother Nature with me. Ha ha! 284 ships, nearly 80% of the Roman fleet was destroyed. As many as 100,000 men drowned in a terrifying act of nature. Never before had Rome lost so many men in a single incident. 100,000 casualties for any other nation would be crippling. Any other nation would hastily sue for peace. Any other nation would spend decades trying to recover. But Rome was not just any other nation. Infamous for its unrelenting determination in the face of overwhelming odds, Rome said, well, I guess we'll just have to build another fleet. And they did. In just 3 months, they built 220 more ships, an astonishing feat. The Romans sent out their brand spanking new war fleet, and they got caught in another storm. This time, a whole nother fleet was lost, and still, the Romans did not give up. The Carthaginians couldn't believe it. Their enemy had just lost hundreds of thousands of men, had 2 fleets almost entirely destroyed, and they still wouldn't surrender. As one Roman poet put it, the victor is not victorious if the vanquished does not consider himself so. In typical Roman fashion, after a short break, they were once again building another fleet. However, for now, after all the disasters at sea, the focus began shifting back to the land campaign in Sicily. The Carthaginians, overconfident from recent successes, attempted to retake Panormus, but the Romans countered the terrifying war elephants by throwing stuff at them and scaring them away. Having stopped the Carthaginian advance, the road was now open to the final Carthaginian stronghold on the island, Lilybaeum. Lilybaeum was an extremely well-fortified city. In 250 BC, the Romans laid siege. The Carthaginian defense, however, was fierce, and skilled blockade runners kept the city supplied. Progress was so slow that the siege would last another 9 years. To make matters worse, the Carthaginians later sent possibly the greatest military general of the time, a man named Hamilcar Barca, to the island. He engaged in a skillful campaign of guerrilla warfare behind enemy lines, and for the remainder of the war, he was a major thorn in the Roman side. For now, with the deadlocked siege at Lilybaeum and the new Roman fleet at sea, things seemed to be at a standstill, and the Romans had to do something to break the deadlock. Thankfully, the Roman consul, Clodius Pulcher, had an idea. He tried to get things moving by attacking the Carthaginian fleet at Trapana. Now, before a battle, to predict if they would win, it was common for the Romans to look for signs from the gods. This could mean observing the weather or inspecting some cow livers. You know, typical religion stuff. In this case, Pulcher reportedly tried to feed some sacred chickens, but unfortunately for him, they wouldn't eat a crumb. A very bad sign. Well, he said, if they won't eat, then let them drink! Stupid chickens! We'll observe the weather instead. Gods, give me a sign. Ignore that. Okay, how about this? If I can get this piece of paper into that trash basket, we'll win. Okay, if I can stand here silently for 5 seconds and do nothing, we'll win. Dammit! Pulcher chose to ignore the signs from the gods, and in the following battle, the superior Carthaginians tore them to shreds. It also didn't help that by now the Romans had removed the corvus to stabilize their ships, and without their secret weapon, it was a disaster, and Pulcher was disgraced. To make matters worse, the victorious Carthaginian fleet then went on to intercept a Roman supply fleet on its way to Lilybaeum. As they approached, however, they saw the signs of an incoming storm, so they took shelter. The Romans, on the other hand, said, "Onward, men! Set sail! We've got to deliver these supplies stat!" But sir, those clouds, don't you think we ought to have learned our lesson by now? Yes, Brian, we ought to have. But we haven't. Another fleet and 50,000 men lost in another storm. Disaster. Now, at this point, there still really isn't a clear winner. Sure, the Romans have captured most of Sicily and cornered the Carthaginian land forces at Lilybaeum, but the continued disasters at sea were critically depleting their resources, and without a strong fleet, Rome could not win. Meanwhile, Hamilcar Barca was still knocking about and creating even more problems. So, where do we go from here? How does this war finally end? By now, the two sides had been fighting for 23 years. They were exhausted. Their money, their resources, their strength were all utterly spent. The Carthaginians in particular were eager to see the war end so they could get back to trading and making money. So after the latest Roman disaster at sea, they said, look, there ain't no way in heck the Romans can come back again. They can't possibly afford to build another fleet. They're done. That's it. Recall the navy, repurpose them as merchant ships, and let's get back to making some money! Assuming the Romans would soon make peace, an anti-war faction within the government recalled a large portion of the navy, leaving Hamilcar on his own. The victors appeared to be declaring themselves victorious. Meanwhile, the vanquished were getting ready for round 5. The Romans built another fleet, this time heavily relying on patriotic donations from the upper classes to afford it. And once again, they put to sea. Sir? The Romans have built another fleet. Oh, for goodness sake, Clarence, can't you see I'm busy rolling around in this pile of money? But sir, I don't care anymore, Clarence. I just don't care! The Carthaginian politicians made a fairly lackluster final effort with a poorly built fleet to supply their forces in Sicily. But when the brand new Roman fleet caught them at the Battle of the Aegates, even without their signature corvus, they dealt them the final blow. And that was that. 23 years of war. Neither side could afford to keep fighting, but the Romans showed that they intended to anyway. The Carthaginians had no choice but to throw in the towel. The war had been long and hard for both sides, but in the end, it was Roman determination that won the fight. The Romans had spent the entire war trying to find a way to deliver the knockout blow. They learned how to build a fleet and engage in naval combat. They developed ingenious new ways of waging war. They attempted an invasion of the Carthaginian heartland, and whenever disasters struck them, they always came back, again and again. The Carthaginians, on the other hand, spent the entire war watching whatever Rome did, and then figuring out how to respond. They were much more passive, and so, it's no wonder then that when both sides were close to collapse, Rome was the one who figured out how to go that little bit further. In 241 BC, the Carthaginian politicians sent word to Hamilcar Barca that he was on his own and could choose to make peace with the Romans if he wished. Hamilcar was stunned. He felt betrayed by the politicians. Some sources say he refused to even negotiate. Nevertheless, terms had to be drawn up. Well, Hammy, I'm glad you Carthaginians have finally come to your senses and recognized who the true winner is. How many fleets did you lose? Okay, here are our terms. You leave Sicily to us and return all of our prisoners. You're not allowed to make war against Syracuse or her allies, and you have to pay us 2,200 talents of silver over the next 20 years. What's a talent of silver? Well, to put it in perspective, in the year 2022, that'll be worth around, let's say, 40 million US dollars. Ay caramba! That will cripple us! Wow, we got a real smart guy over here. Yeah, that's kind of the point, you dingus. Ugh, I guess I have no choice. I accept. Great! Oh, by the way, we changed our minds. You actually have to pay us 3,200 talents of silver over 10 years. Thanks for accepting. Dude! See you later.
Hey! You didn't let me say uncool!
He didn't let me say uncool. The treaty was extremely punishing, and by switching up the terms at the last minute, they enraged the Carthaginians. But still, one of the longest and deadliest wars at the time was finally over. The Romans had won. They achieved their aim of gaining Sicily, and even though it wasn't part of the peace deal, they took advantage of a weakened Carthage and grabbed Corsica and Sardinia as well. Roman expansion beyond the Italian peninsula had just begun.
The Romans hoped that now the Carthaginians would forever be under their thumb. Unfortunately, the harsh terms they placed on the Carthaginians at the end of the war left a growing anger, one that would come back to haunt them. One day, Carthage will have its revenge. That's nice, dear. I'm serious, woman. Maybe not in my lifetime, but perhaps in his. My beautiful son. You are born into a momentous destiny. You shall be Rome's greatest enemy. You'll tear Rome limb from limb. You'll burn their pathetic city into the ground. You'll slaughter their people, men, women, and children. My child, you are vengeance. Stop telling our baby he's vengeance. But he is, Barbara. He's vengeance. That may be so someday, but for now, our son has a name, and you should call him that instead. His name is... All right, our beloved mercenaries. Let's hear it. Okay, thank you one and all for your hard work fighting in the First Punic War. Would have been nice if you'd won, maybe tried a little harder, but this isn't the finger-pointing convention. I know you all have one thing on your minds. Hey, when are we all getting paid? Remember you lost your... Okay. Jim, why don't you tell them? I'm not telling them, you tell them. Ugh. Look, you're not getting paid. What? We lost the First Punic War and owe the Romans a ton of reparations. Of course we can't pay you in full. Let's burn this place to the ground! Hey! Don't burn this place to the ground. Come on, fellas. Will killing us really make you feel better about your money? Yes. Way to go, sir. Shut up, Jim. You're fired. I guess that makes two of us. Huh? In the aftermath of the First Punic War, Carthage's disgruntled mercenaries, left unpaid for all their hard work, revolted, and Carthage found itself caught up in an extremely destructive mercenary war. The panicked Carthaginians hired more mercenaries to fight the mercenaries they couldn't afford to pay, and Carthage came dangerously close to collapse. All the while, across the water, there was Rome. Ha! Look at those morons. We just kicked their ass in the First Punic War, and now their own mercenaries are revolting. Haha. Yeah. Wait, First Punic War? You mean there's gonna be a second one? Well, we're definitely taking advantage of this situation. So almost certainly, yes. The Romans did, in fact, take advantage of the situation. Amongst the chaos, rebels on the Carthaginian island of Sardinia sent out a cry for help to Rome. Hot diggity dog, said the Romans. That's free real estate. And so in they went. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's our island. Get the hell off. Hey, they requested our help. We're simply helping. Oh, no, you don't. Look, we're sending our own army to deal with the rebels, okay? But just to be clear, we're not trying to start a fight with you, so, don't declare war on us or anything. War! We surrender! Great. And as part of the peace treaty, we get to keep these islands. The Carthaginians were hopping mad. As if their humiliating loss in the First Punic War wasn't bad enough, the Romans now took advantage of their mercenary problem and stole their islands. This shocking land grab was pretty hard to justify, even by Roman standards. Additionally, the Romans now demanded Carthage pay them even more money on top of what was already owed. If Rome was trying to make Carthage as mad as possible, they were doing a fantastic job. The seeds of a Second Punic War were being sown, and they were being watered with Carthaginian tears. Resentment in Carthage only continued to grow. Eventually, Carthage solved their mercenary problem thanks to Carthaginian military genius and hero of the First Punic War, Hamilcar Barca. He sorted those naughty mercenaries out with some good old-fashioned atrocities, and the destructive mercenary war was over. Still, all was not well in Carthage. Mere decades ago, they were the top dogs in the Western Mediterranean. Now, after the crushing defeat in the First Punic War
and a huge bill to pay the Romans, Carthage was well and truly under Rome's thumb. What on earth were they supposed to do? If they wanted any chance at regaining their former strength, there was one thing they needed now, more than anything: money. But as long as they owed Rome $1 bazillion, there was nothing they could do. Fortunately for them, amongst their ranks, there was one big hunk of a man with one big clump of a brain. Me!
Hamilcar Barca!
Yes! Wait, why do you all have the exact same voice?
I have it too!
That's right. Hero of the First Punic War, greatest general alive, and the poster above my bed. Hamilcar Barca had an idea. All right, we need money? Well, I've got one word for you. Spain. An area filled with lucrative silver mines, from which the silver would flow like a river, and our pockets would be stuffed, like Tony's mother at a buffet. Hey! So here's my proposal. What the hell? You send me with an army to Spain. I'll expand our territory, get those silver mines up and running, and we'll be able to pay the Romans back in no time. Okay. But just to check, you're not secretly raising the money to go on a bloodthirsty revenge spree against Rome, are you? Because we can't afford that. Hanno, my dear, I'm simply going to pay them back. Well, that wasn't reassuring. Few in Carthage were as bitter about their loss in the First Punic War as Hamilcar Barca. 98% of his brain matter had been reallocated to thoughts of revenge. He was also fed up with the Carthaginian politicians for what he deemed a cowardly betrayal when they surrendered at the end of the last war. And so for Hamilcar, going to Spain meant being able to act independently from the weak Carthaginian government, building his own strength, and then perhaps somewhere down the line, revenge. However, he wasn't going to Spain by himself. Hannibal? Yes, father? Would you like to come with me to build an empire in Spain? Oh boy, would I! Barbara, mind if I take our 9-year-old son with me? I want to implant an intense hatred of Rome in him and prepare him for a glorious campaign of vengeance. Just try not to traumatize him, dear. No promises. The young boy Hannibal would accompany his father, watching, learning. Boy, you see that city over there? Yes, father? That is Rome. Do you know what we do to Romans? No, father. We hate them, Hannibal. We hate them with every fiber of our being. But why, father? Can't I just play with my Digimons? No, son! They took everything from us. Our land, our wealth, our pride. Those animals. I'll tear them limb from limb. I'll burn their pathetic city to the ground. Dad? I'm sorry, son. I've just never been so proud. Keep going. I'll slaughter their people. I'll cut off their faces and wear them as masks. I love you, son. After taking Hannibal to the Temple of Baal and having him swear an oath never to be a friend of Rome, off dad and son went for their lovely beach holiday in Spain. But Spain was already inhabited by many tribespeople, and when Hamilcar suddenly showed up in their territory, they were like, "Hey, who the hell are you? What are you doing here?" "I'm teaching my son how to become a warrior like me." "Aw, well that's sweet. Well then, little guy, let's see what you got." Good boy. As Hamilcar got to work fighting the tribes of Iberia and expanding Carthaginian influence, Hannibal became a child of war, even earning battle scars from a young age. And he grew to become a great military leader himself, making his father very proud. "I love you so much, son." "Dad, not in front of the enemy." "You killed that guy so well, son." The Barcas successfully consolidated Carthaginian power, got those silver mines up and running, and were sending buckets of cash back to a money-starved Carthage. And symbolizing Carthage's regrowing strength, a beautiful new city would eventually be founded in Spain. New Carthage, with a magnificent palace at its center. Carthage is back, baby! What in the name of Apollo is going on here? Romans! Flowing silver mines? Dancing elephants? What are you up to, Hamilcar? I'm simply gathering the money to pay you back. Oh, okay then. Or are you rebuilding strength to go on a bloodthirsty revenge spree? Like I said, Claudius, I'm simply trying to pay you back. Aw. You guys are hugging.
No, we're not.
I was hugging. Hamilcar had practically carved out a kingdom for himself in Spain, free from the meddling Carthaginian politicians. His power was becoming immense. But Dad, yes, my son? I'm confused. Are we really simply paying the Romans back? We're not gonna go on a bloodthirsty revenge spree? Of course we are. I'm just saying that to get the Romans off our backs. Listen, here's the most important life lesson I have for you. Vengeance is everything. An all-encompassing thirst for vengeance is great for your mental health. Are you still confused? No, I get it now. But what if the Romans find out what we're up to? They won't find out. Why? Well, Hannibal, because I use NordVPN. Carthaginian tears, a child of war, and the Carthaginian conquest of Spain. The Carthaginian recovery had been staggeringly quick, and Rome was seriously alarmed. But they were also preoccupied with ongoing wars elsewhere, including an expansionist war to the north, where they were enslaving thousands of northern Celts. So for now, to keep Carthage in check, the Romans insisted on a new treaty. See this river? The two sides agreed that everything above it was in Rome's sphere of influence, while beneath it was Carthage. Under no circumstances were the Carthaginians to expand north of that river. But for now, Hamilcar and son were living it up. Well, son, here's to many more years of successful campaigning in Spain. Now, if you'll excuse me, I just have to go fight those guys. See you later, son. I love you. What the? Oh, crap. I drowned? Oh, well. Always remember, son. You are vengeance. Also, delete my browsing history. Hamilcar Barca was tragically ambushed at a river and drowned. His son-in-law, and possibly also his lover, no further questions, took charge for a while. But he too was later assassinated, leaving finally a 26-year-old Hannibal in charge of the Carthaginian armies in Spain. Sources say the men readily accepted him as their leader. He chose to suffer the same hardships as his men. He lived in the same conditions, was often the first into battle and the last one out. And it also helped that he looked a lot like his dad. He had the total respect of his men. If he said jump, they said how high. If he said tuck me in, they said how tight. If he said talk to a girl without peeing your pants, they said that's impossible. Nobody can do that. An army that would follow him anywhere would be crucial for exacting his vengeance against Rome. Hannibal's army had become a strong and loyal fighting force, and that was making a certain nation very uncomfortable. Seeing Carthage re-strengthen so quickly was not something Rome had expected, yet here they were, paying off their debts and expanding their territory. It didn't feel very much like Carthage was under Rome's thumb at all, and Rome wanted to put an end to it. Tensions were strung tighter than your liar's G-string, and all it would take was one incident to trigger all-out war. And in 219 BC, a city in Spain would find itself at the very center of that fateful incident, Saguntum. Remember that treaty declaring everything south of this river to be Carthage's sphere of influence? Well, Saguntum should therefore obviously be Carthaginian, right? Wrong! Saguntum had actually scored itself an informal alliance with Rome after Rome had helped it with an internal dispute. With Carthaginian encroachment, Saguntum began to fear for its independence, and Rome declared itself Saguntum's protector. But this clearly went against the Ebro River Treaty. So what on earth was Rome doing? Were the Saguntines and the Romans truly just BFFs? It's possible. Or was Rome deliberately trying to interfere with Hannibal's Spanish expansion and maintain a staging post for a future war with Carthage? More likely. And Hannibal certainly viewed this Rome-Saguntum alliance as an outrage. Yet another example of Roman arrogance. At first, he left Saguntum alone. But having learnt from his father to hate all things Roman, and having inherited his father's dream of bringing Rome to its knees more and more, Hannibal may have begun to see Saguntum as an opportunity. Could this
controversial alliance be just what devilish little Hannibal needed to kickstart a second war with Rome and restore Carthaginian dominance. It's even possible that Rome were also using Saguntum to goad Hannibal into a fight so they could go and kick him out of Spain. And as the two giants began gearing up for round two, the poor people of Saguntum had no idea that they were about to be crushed in the collision. Hey, your alliance with Saguntum is an insult, and we won't stand for it. They're our friends, Hannibal, and if you lay a finger on them, it'll be an act of war. Yeah, Hannibal, back the hell off. War, eh? I was thinking I might just besiege their city and massacre their people. I hope you do, Hannibal. Find out what happens. Yeah, we hope you do, Hannibal. Wait, what? Maybe I will. Go ahead. Kill them all. Okay then. Fine. Okay, guess I'll do just that. Consul, we look forward to it. Consul? You're gonna protect us though, right, Consul? Consul! Oh no! To top it all off, when the Saguntine people made the genius decision of raiding into Carthaginian territory, enough was enough. In an action that was guaranteed to provoke the Romans into war, Hannibal besieged the city. The siege of Saguntum lasted 8 cruel months before Hannibal broke through the city defenses and turned Saguntum into a killing field. It was a massacre. What the hell? Tell me I didn't just catch you massacring our friends, the Saguntines. Well, Consul, if you like the Saguntines so much, perhaps you should sug on these nuts. Hearing word of the attack on Saguntum, Rome was understandably in an uproar, and all eyes were now fixated on what would happen next, as Rome sent a delegation to Carthage, led by one of the most highly esteemed Roman senators, Fabius Maximus. He demanded an answer for Hannibal's sins. All right, listen up, scum. You've got a rogue general in Spain attacking a Roman ally. What are we supposed to do about it? Well, there shouldn't have even been a Roman ally in Spain. You're the aggressor here. Hand Hannibal over to us as a criminal so we can punish him severely. No, yes, no, yes. No. Look, I hold in the folds of my toga both peace and war. Which one should I let drop? Whichever one you want. Then I choose war! The Second Punic War had begun. Pack it up, boys. We've got 'em. We already destroyed these clowns once, and we were the underdogs. Now, we're the overdogs? Hot dogs. Exactly. This is gonna be easy. Here's the plan. Consul Longus, you take your army and sail straight for Carthage. Burn that city to the ground. And Consul Scipio, you just head on over to Iberia and make sure this Hannibal guy doesn't do anything crazy. I mean, what's he gonna do? Cross the Alps? We're going to what? Cross the Alps. We're going to what? I just told you, Hannibal will freeze to death. Trust me, Jerome. The Romans are expecting us to fight the same way we did last time, passively, taking no initiative. They think it's gonna be easy. So this time, we have to be aggressive. We have to go on the attack. It sickens me to say this, but this time, we have to be a little more Roman. You mean we're gonna take poops and baths together? But I'm insecure about my hairy legs. No, I'm saying this time, we're gonna take the fight to them. Think about it. Rome thinks they're simply going to invade us and win the war. So when they suddenly find themselves being invaded from the north, they'll freak out. Like Tony's mother, when the buffet runs out of shrimp. Hey! I gotta admit, it's actually kind of genius. And my hairy legs will insulate me from the cold. That's the spirit. Hannibal, you have my sword, and my spear, and my legs. Ugh. Hannibal's plan, a daring alpine trek to surprise the Romans, was a bold but risky strategy.
If it paid off, he could catch the Romans with their pants down, but he could also end up losing a ton of men and supplies in the hostile mountain conditions. Nevertheless, in 218 BC, with a fire in his eyes and some vengeance in his belly, Hannibal brought his force of almost 100,000 men across the Ebro River. They spent months on the road, trekking through the cold, hostile mountain conditions. And when they finally reached the other side, they said, "Hooray! We did it! We crossed the Alps." No, those were the Pyrenees. Those are the Alps. After crossing the Pyrenees, the army then had to pass through southern Gaul, a vast territory filled with tribespeople, many of whom were hostile to Hannibal's presence. His journey to the Alps was an ordeal in itself, as he was forced to fight his way through and incurred pretty hefty losses before even reaching the mountains. His plan was almost stopped in its tracks entirely, as the Roman consul Scipio, on his way to Iberia, discovered Hannibal was right on his doorstep. Suddenly, Hannibal's journey became a race, as he rushed to get his massive army across the vast Rhone River before the Romans could intercept him. The crossing was chaotic, with the panicking elephants causing several men to drown. And the first combat of the war occurred when small scouting parties from each side encountered one another. When Scipio finally caught up to Hannibal's position, what he found was an empty Carthaginian camp. Hannibal had slipped through his fingers. The Roman consul Scipio felt the weight of the situation. Quite unbelievably, Hannibal was going to cross the Alps into Italy, and the Romans had no idea where he would emerge. For the first time, a Carthaginian force had the Roman homeland under threat. Scipio sent his men onto Iberia as planned, but he himself rushed home to raise a new army so that if Hannibal survived the crossing, Scipio would be there, waiting. Would you look at that, boys? We're here! The Alps! Although it is a little later than I expected. Yeah, it's kinda chilly. We'll set up camp here and wait for spring, right? It's way too cold, right? Hannibal? Hannibal's famous crossing of the Alps was brutal. It was already autumn, and the men suffered terribly. It was cold. Men would fall off the sides of icy cliffs. They starved. They fell off the sides of icy cliffs. Some sources say they had to eat their pack animals and would finish off dying comrades in order to take their clothes for extra warmth. And then they would fall off the sides of icy cliffs. Imagine an army of 50,000 men with all of their horses, supplies, and 37 elephants trying to navigate the most hostile mountain range in Europe. And it wasn't just nature that they were up against. Tribespeople lived in the mountains, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A tribe approached Hannibal and said, "Hey man, geez, that's some nice armor. What is that, gold? Man, I'd really like that armor." "Hey boss, they've got food as well. Shut up, be cool." "Hey, why don't you let us guide you through this narrow gorge? We're not gonna kill you or nothing. Just walk right on through there. We're not gonna kill you. It's just right this way." "We're not gonna kill you." Hannibal's army were forced to fight their way through the gorge as massive boulders rained down on them from above. Some clever reorganization of his line helped them survive, and they were able to fend off the opportunistic tribes. But losses from the constant attacks were heavy. As the journey continued, men who went over the sides would get stuck on the ice sheets below and had to make a grisly choice between starving to death or just getting it over with. When the deeply demoralized army reached the summit and rested for a couple days, Hannibal tried to lift their spirits with a rousing speech. "Look, men, down there, it's Rome. These plains stretching out in front of you are bountiful with food to eat and Romans to kill. Move, Bessie! Look, you have just climbed the walls of Rome. The hard part is over. From here on out, it's all downhill. And nobody else will die. Except for them. The rest of us here, no one dies. Starting now." Okay, let's go.
Oh, for goodness sake!
As it turned out, the descent was as deadly as the way up, with the cold really starting to set in. The path became even more narrow, and at one point, the men spent 3 days in the freezing cold repairing a collapsed road. When they finally reached the bottom, Hannibal said, "Look, guys, we did it."
Well, I thought it went really well.
When Hannibal left Spain, he had about 100,000 men. By the time he reached the Italian plains, his numbers had dwindled to about 26,000. He was now caught in enemy territory, without a supply line or source of reinforcements. And any elephants who had survived to this point were almost certainly traumatized. So what on earth was Hannibal up to? This supposed military genius had just led a starving and weakened army right into enemy territory. Any modern general who lost half their men to mountains would be immediately fired and possibly even depantsed on live TV. Here's the thing. While Hannibal may not have planned on losing quite so many men, he had almost certainly expected considerable losses, and he always had a plan for how to replace them. Need men? Northern Italy was full of men. Big, burly Celtic men. All the men Hannibal would ever need to beat off Rome. These Celts were filled with resentment, having only recently been conquered by Rome. Hannibal hoped to be seen as a liberator, convince the Celts to cut ties with Rome, and instead join him in crushing Rome. That way, he could gain a source of reinforcements and supplies right in Rome's backyard. But sir, in order to win the loyalty of the Celts, we would need to make a seriously favorable impression on them. How do we get them to like us? Kill them. One of Hannibal's first actions in Italy was to obliterate a nearby tribe who wouldn't join him. This sent a clear message to all the other tribes. It was his wrath they should fear, not Rome's. The realization that a Carthaginian army had just invaded them must have been shocking for the Romans. But when they looked at this ragtag group broken by the Alps, they couldn't have felt very intimidated. However, Hannibal was now in Italy, and he was about to embark on one of the most astonishing military campaigns in all of human history. The Romans may not have known it yet, but there was now a monster loose in their territory, and he was vying for Roman blood. Hannibal's army had survived its famous crossing of the Alps, and he was now in Italy. With Hannibal's arrival, the Roman consul Scipio hit the ground running. In typical Roman fashion, he marched his army straight at the enemy, and Hannibal began preparing for his first combat with Rome on Italian soil. Before the battle, Hannibal wanted to inspire his men, so he staged a gladiatorial death match between captured Celt prisoners, with the winner getting prizes and freedom. He then explained that the whole thing was a metaphor. A metaphor? For what? You! These warriors are you! You're trapped in Italy with no escape. Your only choice now is to fight and win. What about the dead guy? That's you if you don't win. And the prizes? That's what you stand to gain by winning. And the fact that I've soiled myself in all this excitement? No, that's not part of the metaphor. Okay. Hannibal also smashed in the head of a goat. Again, for inspiration. Scipio, on the other hand, now arriving in the area, opted for the more classic route of a rousing pre-battle speech. Look at them men. Weak, starved by the Alps, while we are the strongest military in the world. This will be easy, like 10,000 horse-sized ducks fighting a baby-sized baby. It'll be like Mike Tyson in his prime, kicking a baby. A tug of war between 10 sumo wrestlers and help me out here, Ralph. A baby, sir? Yes, that's it. A baby. The point is, there is absolutely no possible way we could lose a battle this easy. So, if everybody's ready, on my mark, The Battle of Ticinus was over almost as soon as it had begun, as the Romans found themselves completely outmatched by Hannibal's famed lightning-fast Numidian cavalry.
a key element in Hannibal's devastating double envelopment tactics. In the chaos, Scipio was wounded. Thankfully, according to some ancient writers, his handsome 17-year-old son, Scipio the Younger, saw his father fall. Scipio the Younger supposedly saved his father, and in the process, earned himself a lot of daddy's kisses. The Romans ended up fleeing the area, destroying the bridge behind them as they went. For a nation so overtly confident in victory, believing Hannibal to be an easy kill, the Romans found themselves running away with their tail between their legs. It was humiliating. And you know who thought so as well? The Celts. They began flocking to Hannibal's side, just as he'd hoped. Even Celtic troops fighting for Rome in the Roman camp began to reconsider. Man, I'm thinking we should try to join Hannibal. I hear you. Maybe we should bring him a gift. What do you think he'd like? Oh, I know. Hey, Hannibal. We want to join your side and we brought you a present. A gift? For me? I hope it's Roman heads. Oh, please be Roman heads.
How did you know?
Running away from Hannibal was humiliating enough, but having dozens of Romans beheaded in the night, now that's embarrassing. Ticinus had been a relatively small battle, but the psychological impact it had early on was huge, and it was only just a taste of what Hannibal was capable of. Despite the shocking initial loss, however, Rome still didn't seem to fully understand the danger posed by the monster now loose in their territory. The Senate was full of excuses. It's those traitorous Celts. That's why we lost. Yeah, and it was a cavalry battle. Wait until Hannibal faces our almighty legions. And our consul was bold. Once he faces our other fully follicled consul, then he'll really pee his pants. That other consul, Longus, had been in the south all this time, preparing to invade Africa. He had seen some success, even capturing Malta. But then he heard the news. Hannibal's in Italy? And I'm being ordered home? But I was gonna be the big boy. I was gonna invade Carthage and win the war. Well, you can be a big boy at home.
No!
Does somebody need a nap, sir?
No!
And so Longus brought his army on the long journey north. When he arrived in the area to decisively neutralize Hannibal, the two consuls joined their forces together, creating a double consular army. But the two consuls weren't exactly on the same page. Having a nice rest there, old man? I'm wounded, Longus. Pathetic. You don't understand. He's more dangerous than we thought. Maybe for you. Whoops. Listen, we can't just march straight at him like we normally do. We need to train our men through the winter, and we'll try again in spring. Sorry, I don't take advice from a bowling ball. Hey! I'll kick your ass, Longus. Any day now. I'm coming! Just you wait. Oh, Scipio, you feeble old man. Scipio was apparently quite cautious after his recent encounter with Hannibal, while Longus, typically Roman, couldn't wait to give Hannibal a swirly. So who would get their way? Well, when two consuls joined their forces, it turned out the Romans had an interesting system in place. They would each take turns being the one in charge. Consul 1 would lead one day, then Consul 2 the next. Back and forth, back and forth. As you can imagine, when the two consuls didn't agree, things didn't go so well. In this case, due to Scipio's injury, Longus probably assumed even more command than normal. Hannibal had Celtic spies in the Roman camp. He fully understood the Roman system and Longus's hot-headed nature, and he knew he could exploit it.
For goodness sake!
What's wrong, sir? I'm trying to order some pizza, but I keep getting fed all these personalized ads about being a hothead.
I'm not a hothead, am I?
No, sir. Look at this. Butt insurance? Who would buy butt insurance? Yeah, that sounds really stupid. Sir, it seems like a lot of data brokers have collected data on you. They could sell that data to Hannibal.
What?
But don't worry, because you can get rid of that data with today's wonderful sponsor, Incogni.
Hooray!
I've been getting at you for some time to protect your personal data online. But you're a nimwit, aren't you? You didn't do it, did you? Typical. And now would you look at that? Tons of data brokers have collected a heck of a lot of your personal data and might sell it to third parties like advertisers or insurance companies without you even knowing.
Ever wonder where Sally from the Butt Insurance Company got your name, number, address, social security number, and favorite color from? Probably a dirty data broker. We could painstakingly contact the hundreds of brokers that have our data and politely ask them to delete it. That process would only take the average human about 3,000 years. And that's why you need Incogni. I was shocked to find how many data brokers Incogni had tracked, potentially selling my data. But all I had to do was create an Incogni account, give them permission to work on my behalf, then sit back and let them do all the hard work for me. And since these data brokers don't stop there, Incogni will continuously work to keep my data safe with an annual plan. So if you want to protect your personal data too, go to incogni.com/oversimplified to get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. That's incogni.com/oversimplified. And as always, you'll be supporting my channel. So thank you. Now, where were we? Oh yeah. Roman heads, a double consular army, and a hothead. Hannibal needed to keep smashing the Romans in battle in order to maintain the loyalty of the Celts. And so he was eager to fight another battle. The combined Roman force possibly outnumbered him, so he carefully crafted a clever trap, and he made sure to spring it while Longus was still in charge. The plan began with his army getting an early night's sleep. All right, boys, time for lights out. Sorry, but we got a big day ahead of us. Tomorrow, we're gonna massacre the Romans. Good night, boys. Dream of revenge. Gorzog, send out the cavalry. That night, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry made their way over to the Roman camp, arriving just before dawn. Hey, Romans! Wakey, wakey! What's going on? Hey, Longus, your butt smells like a butt.
It does not! Scipio, awaken the troops!
Longus, these playground insults are clearly meant to lure you out.
Well, it's working! Send out the troops!
Longus, it's clearly a trap.
And I'm falling for it! Send out the troops!
Hey guys, wake up. You're heading out for battle.
What?
But we haven't had breakfast.
We're skipping breakfast! I don't think you can do that.
As the Romans hurried out of camp, the Numidians began luring them back to the Carthaginian camp, where these gentle angels were just awakening from their slumber.
Eat up, boys. We're having pancakes.
While the Carthaginians were enjoying their hearty breakfast, the starving Romans were still on their way.
Hurry up!
We have to catch those Numidians. Hey,
Why have you stopped marching?
Longus, there's a freezing river in front of us.
Well, get your gluteus maximus in the water!
All right, boys, time to lather up. This oil will insulate you from the cold. It also smells like lavender. There's the Carthaginian camp. Get ready to fight, men.
Sir, I think the water from the river is beginning to ice over. I can't move.
Oh, I'm sorry. You thought war would be fun? Sitting around a nice hot campfire playing Truth or Dare with your friends?
Welcome to the real world!
Truth. Who do you like?
Sharon.
Hey, look guys, the Romans are here. Having perfectly orchestrated events so that his enemy was cold, tired, and hungry, while his men were well rested and covered in oil. When the two sides engaged one another, the Romans were in no condition to fight. And the cherry on top, the previous night, Hannibal had sent out an elite force of men led by his brother to go and hide behind a bush. They suddenly sprung out, encircling the exhausted Romans, who were then cut to pieces. Once again, Hannibal's superior cavalry and double envelopment tactics had flummoxed the Romans. But the key word at Trebia was control. Hannibal used his intel on the enemy and the environment of the battlefield to carefully control the conditions of battle, creating lots of little advantages for himself that paved the way to success. And concealing troops for an ambush? All of these things are what make Hannibal the genius he's remembered as today. As for Longus, he managed to escape the battlefield with a small number of troops. Disgraced, he didn't want the Senate to find out what had happened, and he began obscuring communications back to Rome. Longus, where have you been? We've been looking for you. Nowhere in particular. Longus, 30,000 men are missing. Do you know where they are? They're taking a bath. 30,000 men? All in a bath? Yes. Longus, what's under that rug? Aurora Borealis? Aurora Borealis? Oh, well, that's my consulship over. Good luck with Hannibal. Bye. Trebia had been a disaster for the Romans. And as even more Celts began flocking to Hannibal, Rome largely lost its control over Cisalpine Gaul. In Rome, complacency turned to alarm. Hannibal had outwitted them on their own soil and inflicted a costly defeat. But with that, Scipio and Longus's terms as consul were over. They were replaced with two new consuls, Servilius and Flaminius. The Romans may now have begun to realize the trouble they were in and the genius Hannibal had shown in invading Italy. The Romans had expected to be the ones controlling this war. Remember, they thought they were going to invade Carthage. Now their plans lay in ruins, and they were levying 11 new legions to deal with the threat. Hannibal had completely redefined the war. But Hannibal had a little problem of his own. Things had gone well so far, but the Celts were notoriously fickle, and Hannibal needed to ensure he maintained their alliance and his base of support in Italy. Any Celts he captured fighting for Rome, he treated extremely well and allowed them to return to their homes. But the longer he hung around in their territory, eating all their food and leaving beard trimmings in their sinks, the more resentful they may become. They wanted to go south and plunder some Roman booty, and Hannibal also hoped to sway Rome's other Italian allies in the south to his side. So from here, the path was clear. Hannibal had to move south. Just one problem. There were two main routes Hannibal could take to move south. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly where the two new Roman consuls had taken fortified positions. If Hannibal tried to move on them, he'd be fighting from a disadvantaged position and could be bottled in. There is a third option. Ooh, tell me. We could move through this vast impassable marshland flooded with dirty, stinky, disease-infested water that at times would come up to our necks. But there's no way we would attempt that, right? That'd be crazy, right? Hannibal? Hannibal's 4-day trek across the Arno marshlands was hell on earth. Almost as crazy as when he crossed the Alps. Imagine 3 full days unable to sit or lie down because there's nowhere to sit or lie down, meaning 4 full days without sleep, slugging through heavy mud. You contract cholera, your foot falls off, and Jim Bob directly in front of you won't stop pooping in your path. In fact, everybody's pooping in your path. Some delirious, sleepless men would see clumps of mud and say, "Man, I could just sink into that." And then they would. When pack animals died, it gave nearby men a chance to rest, but only for a few moments before they were whipped back into line. Even Hannibal himself couldn't escape the torture of it. Hey Hannibal, if we see a Starbucks, can we stop? I need to take a leak. What? Geez, Hannibal, looks like you picked up a nasty eye infection. Normally for this sort of thing, we just wash it out with some clean water. But as you can see, water everywhere, but it's full of Jim Bob's poop. No worries, Doc. I'll just take care of it myself. That'll be $3,000. When the now possibly one-eyed Hannibal and his army emerged from the swamp, they were shattered. But he had just managed to slip 50,000 men right past the Romans into rich Etrurian lands, where he could replenish his supplies, and his Celt allies could go crazy, securing Roman loot and booty. As fields and villages went up in flames, one Roman consul couldn't help but notice. The hot-headed Flaminius, feeling it was his responsibility to protect these lands, rather than waiting for his co-consul to come join him, immediately left to go chase Hannibal. Now, this Flaminius was an interesting character. He was what the Romans called a new man. He came from the lower plebeian classes of Roman society, and as a result, he reportedly had kind of a screw-you attitude to the establishment, and a big old arrogant chip on his shoulder. Picture Sid Vicious wearing a toga. That's Flaminius. And Hannibal, thanks to his spies, knew everything. Just as with Longus, Hannibal knew Flaminius was just the kind of man he could lure into a trap. Hannibal led Flaminius to the entrance of a narrow pass along the north shore of Lake Trasimene. Flaminius watched as Hannibal's army entered the pass. I've done it! I've spotted the enemy! Sir? That big follow us sign seems kind of like they're trying to lure you in. Yes, Gareth, and I'm taking the bait. Sir, this really seems like a trap.
Yes, Gareth, and I'm falling for it.
Daylight was fading, so for now, the Romans set up camp. The two armies encamped across the lake from one another, and night fell over the two camps. In the morning, Flaminius would catch up to Hannibal, and he would be the hero of Rome. For now, the Romans got nice and comfy in their beds. Good night, Flaminius. Good night, Rome. Good evening, Hannibal. During the night, Hannibal ordered total stealth. As tens of thousands of troops scaled the wooded hills above the pass, completely undetected by Rome's scouts. Let's go, girls. Flaminius took off across the lake shore to try to catch Hannibal. As he did, even the weather seemed to be on Hannibal's side. A thick fog rose from the surface of the lake, obscuring visibility. Look at this! This is perfect! The mist will obscure our approach. Hannibal will never see me coming. Sir? Why does it sound like 50,000 Carthaginians are charging down the hill towards us?
You mean 50,000 Carthaginians are charging right into my trap?
The Romans found themselves completely hemmed in on all sides. With zero visibility in the fog, the fighting was terrifying and chaotic. Troops were pushed into the lake in their heavy armor, where they were either cut down or drowned. And Flaminius, who likely stood out like a sore thumb in his consul attire, caught the attention of one Celt warrior, with his head possibly swirling with thoughts of how the Romans had decimated his homeland. According to the ancient writers, this Celt took his chance. In the 3-hour-long massacre, 15,000 Romans were killed, and an equal number captured. An entire army completely wiped out, along with their consul. During the battle, the Roman vanguard had managed to break through at the front and climbed the hill above the fog. When the mist cleared, what they saw was a blood-red lake and a sea of Roman bodies. Worse yet, when the other consuls sent cavalry to try to aid Flaminius's doomed legions, they too were caught and defeated. A double disaster. Rome went into a frenzy. For the second time, Hannibal had completely decimated an entire Roman army. Romans were dying by the tens of thousands. Common citizens began flocking to the city for safety. Women waited by the city gates in tears, hoping to hear news of loved ones. This one man, having just led his battered army across the Alps the previous year, now stood less than 100 miles from Rome. To this point, he had been a problem. Now, Hannibal was a crisis. And in a crisis, Rome took desperate measures. They actually had a system in place when dealing with an emergency of this magnitude. They would forgo their two-consul power-sharing system and instead temporarily give one man near total power and authority to be as decisive as he needed and hopefully salvage the situation. This all-powerful position in Rome's government had a name: dictator. It's actually where we get the word. But unlike modern dictators, Roman ones didn't score perfect rounds of golf or ride bears through the Siberian tundra. They held their power for just 6 months before they were required to give it up. And in Rome's hour of need, the man chosen to be dictator in 217 BC, one of the most highly esteemed members of the Roman Senate, Fabius Maximus. So how would Fabius, as dictator, confront Hannibal?
Well, Fabius understood that marching all of Rome's young men straight into a one-man meat grinder was bleeding Rome dry. Hannibal was clearly too dangerous to face head-on in battle. However, he was also stuck in their territory, with dwindling manpower and forced to live off the land. It wasn't a sustainable position to be in long-term, and he could only remain there for so long. So, if Rome avoided battle with Hannibal to prevent any more crippling losses, and instead simply maneuvered around him, blocking supplies and taking out smaller contingents where possible, Hannibal would gradually become weaker, while they would gradually become stronger. And so Fabius presented his new idea to the Roman Senate. Okay guys, I have an idea. See if you can follow me here, okay? Instead of fighting Hannibal, when he approaches, we run away. Fabius's strategy couldn't have been any less Roman. Romans were meant to march headfirst into battle, not run away from it. It seemed cowardly, and Fabius was extremely unpopular. At this point, Hannibal was continuing south. He had to stay on the move to keep his army fed, and he was still aiming to undermine Rome's alliances in the south. As he went, in a calculated display of aggression, he devastated the Roman countryside and killed many Romans, all in plain sight of Fabius and his army. We're just gonna stand here? Yes. Are you a coward? No. But Fabius, that's my farm. Well, MacDonald, thank you for your sacrifice. You're a hero now. Think of the stories you'll tell. Old MacDonald had a farm. Shut up. But you know who else hated Fabius's strategy? Hannibal. He understood the danger he was in. Turning Rome's allies against her required Hannibal to keep smashing the Romans in battle. He couldn't do that if Fabius wouldn't fight him. Multiple times, Hannibal tried to goad Fabius into a fight, but Fabius wouldn't bite. Failing that, he tried to turn Rome against Fabius. According to the writer Livy, he burned down all the farms he could, but any farm he learned was owned by Fabius himself. He left well alone. Hey Fabius, why isn't he burning down your farm? You got some sort of a secret deal with him? What? Of course not!
Hey, Hannibal! What? Burn my farm too, please! What? Burn my farm too, please! No! Remember our secret deal!
Well, you gotta admit, he's a genius. Hannibal's problem, however, was that he had to stay on the move to keep supplying his army from the local lands. At one point, he entered Campania, one of the richest regions of Italy, great for resupplying, and great for showing up Fabius in front of Rome's South Italian allies. But he was caught in a valley, and Fabius quickly moved to block his escapes. Haha! We've got him! After he's used up all the valley's supplies, he'll starve. Sir? What are all those lights leaving the valley? Is he trying to escape? Lights in plain view. Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one.
And we're falling for it!
Suspecting a trap, Fabius refused to budge. But other Romans in the valley rushed to confront Hannibal, only to find the Carthaginian army was actually just a herd of oxen with torches tied to their heads. They then found themselves caught in an ambush. With the Romans distracted, Hannibal's army was able to slip away into the night, unopposed. Classic Hannibal. For all his inaction, the dissatisfied Romans mockingly dubbed him Fabius the Delayer. But the thing is, Fabius's strategy was probably the best thing he could have done. He was right that constant encounters with Hannibal were bleeding Rome dry, and the time he took allowed Rome some breathing room to recover their forces when they desperately needed to, while putting Hannibal into an increasingly more difficult position. Modern historians view Fabius's strategy as generally a good idea. To this day, the act of not engaging an enemy, but instead gradually wearing them down, is still referred to as the Fabian strategy. But when Fabius's term finally came to an end, the Senate couldn't have been happier. It was time to start fighting again. However, they probably had a little chat about how they were going to go about it. See, Hannibal's tactics up until now had been very sneaky, or if you're a Roman, you might say dishonorable. I'm sick of it!
Every time we try to take this guy down, we march straight at him. But then, oh no, Hannibal's hiding in a bush. Hannibal's got 30,000 men up a tree. At this point, I'm not convinced my wife isn't just Hannibal wearing a disguise. Cooey. Look, this time, we obviously have to switch something up. Now granted, we're Roman, so we're gonna march straight at him without thinking. That can't be helped. It's in our blood. But I have a proposition. This time, when we march straight at him, we do it with a massive army. I'm talking like 80,000 men. It won't matter what kind of shenanigans he pulls. He can hide in all the bushes he wants. There's no way he can possibly beat off 80,000 men. Grow up! You know what I mean? And so it was. With 2 new consuls, Rome put together a massive army, the biggest Rome had ever fielded, to put Hannibal away once and for all. To gather the men required, 2/3 of them ended up being completely inexperienced. But how much experience does it take to be expendable war fodder? As this massive army set out in the summer of 216 BC, the Romans knew they needed to win this battle. Just one victory over Hannibal would likely be enough to end his entire campaign. And this time, their overwhelming manpower gave them confidence they could do it. Hannibal had taken position at the town of Cannae, where he had captured an important Roman supply depot. With Fabius gone, Hannibal knew a battle was likely coming, and he was eager to fight it on his terms. But when his men looked out at the Roman camp, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. That army's huge! There's no way we can possibly beat off all these men. How are we gonna beat off all of these men? You know what I mean. I think he's right, Hannibal. Hannibal is then said to have replied, "Gisco, my friend, don't worry. There may be a lot of them, but amongst their ranks, there's not a single man named Gisco." This joke was apparently so funny that his officers began to laugh and laugh. And when his men in the camp heard the laughter, they were like, "Hey, they're laughing. I guess that means we're gonna win the battle." Yippee! As for the Romans, the consuls were another pairing between an inexperienced hothead and a wise scholar. Although the main historian from this era was good friends with Paulus's family, so take that with a grain of salt. On his day of command, the rash and hasty Varro, despite the apparent pleas from Paulus, sent the army out for battle. And when Hannibal saw this, he did the same. And here comes the single largest battle of the Second Punic War, and one of the most renowned battles in history, the infamous Battle of Cannae. In all the pre-battle maneuvering, Hannibal was able to ensure his army was fighting from the south. This meant the seasonal dust-carrying winds were to his back and blowing directly into the faces of the Romans. Like I said, control. After 2 years in Italy, Hannibal's infantry had dwindled to about 40,000. The Romans possibly outnumbered him 2-1. Their army was so big that their maniples stretched far deeper than they normally would. The Romans planned to charge Hannibal's thin, weak line like a battering ram and break it. They also chose a narrow battlefield in the hopes it would prevent Hannibal's far superior cavalry from being able to outmaneuver them. They wanted an honorable battle where pure strength, rather than trickery, would decide the outcome. If Hannibal had his say, however, trickery might end up having a lot to do with it. He ordered his line to position themselves as an outward bulge, with his weakest troops at the very center. Just behind them, out of sight from the Romans, stood the elite Libyan infantry, waiting for their moment to strike. The battle commenced as the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center. The shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first, and they were pushed back. Hannibal's outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center. Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible against the Roman onslaught, because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job. The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned,
and approached Varro's cavalry from behind. At the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield. The Carthaginians had won the cavalry battle. But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans, and they began to flee. The Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down as they became a giant mass trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians. They didn't realize that they were playing right into Hannibal's hands. At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides. Many of these troops were wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles, and the confused Romans may not have even realized they were the enemy. As Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind. And look at what lies before you. A military general's wet dream, the total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force. The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them. Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves into an encircled position. This was the genius of Cannae. And with that, the annihilation began. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides. The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves. The killing went on so long that the Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself. To Hannibal's several thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to 80,000 dead or captured. Yet another entire army wiped out by Hannibal. Many high-ranking Romans met their end at Cannae. Paulus, for one, but also 80 senators and more. It's been estimated that 20% of Rome's male population aged 18 to 50 died at Cannae. This was it. Hannibal's vengeance. The stunned Carthaginians, as they searched for their own survivors among the dead, couldn't believe the sight of it. An estimated 30,000 gallons of blood now lay spilled on the battlefield. Rome's defeat at Cannae sent shockwaves throughout Italy. Just as Hannibal had hoped, most of southern Italy now defected to his side, including the second largest city on the peninsula. Wow! Hannibal, this is incredible. What could possibly come next? Next? Jim Bob. I've killed 150,000 Romans. I've turned her allies against her. That's it. That's vengeance. So let me tell you what comes next. Rome surrenders. Their territories are reduced. We recover our lost islands. And Carthage dominates the Mediterranean once again. But sir, what if they don't surrender? Jim Bob, did you miss what just happened? Of course they're gonna surrender. Throughout his campaign, Hannibal had shown himself to be very adept at reading the Roman mind. But if he now thought that Rome might surrender, it was the first time he severely underestimated them. And he was about to discover an extremely inconvenient fact about Rome. Rome never surrenders. At a Roman survivors' camp near Cannae, one young officer overheard some troops discussing how they would flee Rome. Drawing his sword, he threatened to cut down any man that would abandon Rome in its hour of need. That officer was Scipio the Younger. But soon enough, the Romans would come to call him Scipio Africanus, the hero of Rome.